Genesis chapter 18. We're going to start in verse 17, go through verse 19. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him."
Well, good morning, Lakeview. It's good to see your smiling face this morning, and it's good to see so many new faces. If going to church is not in your worldview or in your habit, I'm thankful that you're here this morning. I pray, it is my prayer that you will be blessed by the message that I've got prepared for you. And if you're here for Father's Day, I hope that you get equipped to a certain degree as a father. This last week, do you know what a smart home is? You know, the smart home revolution where people can open and close their garage door with their smartphone. Eventually, I think we're working into thought processes where you have an implant and you just think about it, lights turn on and off. We're not there yet, right? But the smart home where everything is connected all together and it's integrated, and clearly it's going to be hacked somewhere, somehow by people, right? My house is not a terribly smart house. But we are raising the IQ just a little bit. We started a couple years ago by purchasing some smart lights, and we've kind of put them on a timer. And they're in Abby's room. She loves them because they just turn on for her in the morning. And you know how sometimes in the Pacific Northwest the sun doesn't decide to come up on time? Right. So that's been our solution, and they just kind of turn on for her, and that's pretty much all that we have in our smart home. Until this week, when we purchased an Amazon Echo. Right? And if you live this close to Amazon and you don't know what that is, I need to learn something about how you live your life. Because I would like to. Amazon Echo is a device, where you speak and it'll tell you things. It's connected to the internet. You can ask all sorts of things. You can talk and it talks back, but not in a bad way. And it's cool because if you have other smart devices in your house, you can, after a lot of rage, you can get those connected with the Amazon Echo. And it can start to listen to what you say. And like I said, I don't have a very smart home, so there's really only one area in my house that I can connect it to. And after a while, we finally got it connected to the lights in Abby's room. The Amazon Echo is in my bedroom, but I got it connected to Abby's lights. And so I'm telling you, it was great the very first time. Kim is frustrated because I keep talking to Alexa. Hey Alexa, what's this? Hey Alexa, what's this? Stop abusing it. It is a tool. We got it hooked up to Abby's lights, and I said, Alexa, turn off Abby's lights. And moments later, hey, what happened? Alexa, turn on Abby's lights. And they turn on, thank you. A few moments later, I stepped out, proud, grinning from ear to ear, and I said, I spoke, and there was light. I spoke again, and there was darkness. And then there was light and darkness again, and Kim, unimpressed, looked at me, and she said, you are a child. Oh, the power. I was more impressed with myself, apparently, than she was. But the power that comes with your words and the commands and things happen. Oh, such a heady experience. Right? Kim is like, we're taking it back. light. Just for a brief moment, I thought maybe I had made a connection with Genesis chapter 1, right? There you go. I spoke and there was light. But what I want to do, I want to spend a little bit of time this morning impressing upon you, especially if you're a dad, that when you speak, things do happen. When you speak to your children, things happen inside their life. It can have a profound effect on their life. I titled the lesson, I think, Make an Impression. But the silly thing is, I don't have to tell a dad to make an impression. He will make an impression. It doesn't matter who you are or how you behave as a father. You will make an impression upon your kids. There's no way to not leave your mark on them. So the real question is, what words will you use? What will be the effect on your kids? You carry more power over your kids than you possibly imagine. And so to take a look at that, I want us to start off in 2 Samuel chapter 13. And if you're thinking, 2 Samuel chapter 13, I'm not familiar. Have I heard a sermon on this? No, the answer is probably you have not. When you typically think about David's life, King David, man after God's own heart, David, we'll go through and, David is the guy who killed the lion. He killed the bear as a little young lad. And God used him as a champion in front of the Philistine to take down Goliath. These are the things that we think about with David. Or maybe we think not only was he a warrior, he was also a poet because he wrote so many things in the Psalms. But you say, but David had a dark side too. He had his own demons. You go, yeah, I remember David and Bathsheba. That's not it. David's personal story is actually checkered with great difficulty. And it starts in 2 Samuel chapter 13 with the rape of his daughter, Tamar. Now I'm gonna confess to you that I've spent more time in this lesson than you will by the time we're done. And as I grow older, I find that I have a harder time preaching some texts now than I did when I was younger and I didn't know what life was about. When I was younger, I'll preach about that. I'll preach about that. Every young and exuberant preacher, I'll preach the full counsel of God. And now when I open up a text like this, Spurgeon, I think, says it best. This text brings much vexation to my soul. And I don't want to take us, I was telling Kim this morning, you know what I'm preaching on? And she's like, no. And I said, of all things, we're going to start about the rape of Tamar. And she's like, oh, so definitely a downer. No, not a downer. Not a downer, just an important place for us to go to be able to understand some things about fatherhood. And so, we're going to take a look at David's life, his troubles with Absalom, his problems with his kids. And this is important for us as men to walk here, to look at this, and to set it against the task of fatherhood. So, 2 Samuel chapter 13. Essentially, most of this story has four main characters. You have Absalom and Tamar, who are both full brothers and sisters. You remember that David is their dad. David had many, many wives, right? That means he had lots of half siblings. You have Absalom and Tamar, and they are brother and sister fully, same mom, same dad. Then you have a half brother named Amnon, who really likes Tamar. And it so consumes him that he is so consumed with his infatuation with Tamar that it is not enough for him to have a strict boundary, she is my sister. He ends up in the beginning of chapter 3 raping Tamar. The dad of all three of these kids is the king of Israel, King David. Okay, let's pick up the story in verse 15 after the incident. 2 Samuel chapter 13, starting with verse 15. Then Amnon hated her, talking about Tamar. Then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong in sending me away. This wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you just did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him, and he said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." And then she was wearing a long, now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, and thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was shoved out of his chamber, and Tamar put ashes on her head, and she tore the long robe that she wore, and she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom, remember, they were raised in the same house, had the same mom. These are siblings as close as they can get. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Now, hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived, a desolate woman. Tamar lived, a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of this, when Dad heard of this, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Right there in chapter 13, we get a glimpse of one of the most ugly, dysfunctional, horrific things a family can ever go through. You have brothers, sisters, and a dad who learns and observes all the horrible things that go on in the life of his family. And all that we see that Dad does in response, instead of bringing Amnon to justice, instead of bringing light to what had happened, all we know of David is he was very angry. And this was not enough for Absalom, who needed vindication. So 2 years later, Absalom made a plan. The plan was to invite all of his brothers. By the way, invite all of his brothers. These are all princes, right? They're all heirs to the throne. Invite all the brothers over to have a great celebration where he had some of his men waiting in order to kill Amnon. Absalom set a trap for Amnon. And he even told them, he said, "Wait until Amnon has had a little bit of wine. Wait until he's pretty happy with where he's at. And then kill him." And so they did exactly as Absalom told them to do. In a panic. By the way, this is why you never bring all the sons together. This is actually a pretty common thing in antiquity. If you want to make a power play for the throne, bring all of the heirs to the throne together and kill them. Right? So they're all there together, and suddenly one of the brothers dies. Everybody runs screaming out. All the brothers jump on their donkeys, and they run all away from Absalom's house. They think there's a power coup going on. It wasn't. It was Absalom just trying to kill his brother to get revenge for what his brother had done to his sister, right? Everybody starts running. In all the confusion, David is given this... Oh, wow. I need to turn this on. In the confusion, David is given the report that all of his sons were slaughtered. He's really frightened, and he finally gets word from his brother in 2 Samuel chapter 13, starting with verse 32. But Jonadab, son of Shemiah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men." There it is. The king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. By the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore, let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. Here's what we know. At this point, for 2 years, Absalom sat on the hatred of his brother, and he seethed inside of himself, making no word, making no sign, until the moment was right to avenge his sister and kill his brother. He says here, for by the command of Absalom, this thing has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. In other words, Absalom says, well, here we are, the most powerful man in the kingdom. My dad will not actually take care of my sister and avenge her. He won't bring my brother to justice. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait until the time is right. And then I will protect my sister and avenge my sister. I will take justice into my own hands. And so he kills his own brother. And you would think at this point, the story is over, right? You would think it's over. But that's not actually how the story ends. And this is the part that I want you to pay attention to. His anger moves. It's not just sitting on his brother, Amnon. It moves to his father. Now, why does he hate his father, David? Because David is the man who's in power. David is the father of the entire family. David is the man who, if anyone is supposed to bring Amnon to justice, it's dad. Oh, also the king. But he doesn't. David's just angry. And that's it. And so we see the anger of Amnon shift against his brother. The anger of Absalom shift from his brother Amnon to his father David. Now, after the event, Absalom runs off and he hides for 3 years in another land, like asylum. Dad was happy with this because he didn't really know what to do with his son who had just killed his other son. And finally, after 3 years, David missed his son, and one of his friends went and brought his son back close to him. But even still, when Absalom moved back to Jerusalem, his father David wouldn't see him. He didn't know how to visit with his brother or with his son. And so he stayed in Jerusalem for 2 years before King David would see him. Absalom spent 3 years in exile, 2 years in Jerusalem, and still had not seen or reconciled with his father. And as the text goes, Absalom gets very, very angry and agitated, and he wants to go see his father. He doesn't know how to get the attention of his father, and so he makes a list of all the different ways he could get his father's attention, and arson was an A, so it was on the top of the list. So he burned down some people's fields until suddenly his father got his attention. His father said, okay, come on and visit with me. And he goes, as he's trying to get an audience with his father, he says, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore let me go into the presence of the king. This is dad. And if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab, poor guy whose field got burned. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and David summoned Absalom. And so he came to the king, and he bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. If you have ever thought that you live in a dysfunctional family or you have a confusing relationship with your dad, it's worse for Absalom. He doesn't know if his father wants him dead or alive. He doesn't know if the law requires him to be dead or alive. He goes before his father, and his father is given an impossible task to decide if he's going to enforce the law and kill his son for murder or absolve his son because he's his son. Right? Now let me ask this question, because we're through the grittiest part of the story. If you were King David, the father of two sons, one who did something horrible to your daughter, the other who murdered his brother for it. If you were King David, what would you do? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that this is the Old Testament. And we don't actually deal with the Old Testament as though these are real issues that people deal with every day, right? They're gritty and they're old, and those are things that have happened several thousand years ago, so people don't go through that today, right? Except, I am telling you, in my short career in ministry, I have sat with half a dozen men as they wept because their son was molested, their daughter was raped, and they don't know what to do to put their family back together again. And in those moments, those dads, through no fault of their own, have felt like they've completely failed their family. If you were King David, what would you have done? Now, I'm asking that not to place blame on David or to exalt him in this situation, but to say that being a father for David was hard. Because his son, Absalom, as everything unfolded, did what he thought was right in his eyes. David had to experience the tragedy unfold as generations are just torn apart, brothers killing each other, and David doesn't know how to lead or protect his family at this point because what has been given to him is too much for him as a father to know how to bear. And I am telling you, I know fathers who have had to pick this up and carry this burden, believing that to the best of their ability, they have not done enough to lead and protect their family. I don't know what it is about the way families get put together. It's not like there's a script that people sit down with at dinner time and say, I am the dad. It will be my job to protect my family and to lead my family. And yet, it's a very resilient thing. The more people look at family dynamics, the more they recognize, whether it's spoken or unspoken, the family looks to the father specifically to protect and lead their family. There are profound consequences to this. Maybe it starts from the moment your kids are just this high and they see mom say, can you open the pickle jar? Oh, look at what a strong man you are. That happened to us all, right? Just me, that's okay. Oh, that's up really high. Can you go get that for me? Yes, I can. Growing up with my kids growing up, we would walk through places that would terrify my kids. Maybe the only time they ran to grab my hand, but they went to grab my hand. Because for 15 years, I was the most powerful man they've ever known in their life. We've destroyed that reality for them now. But for a long time, I was it. You don't have to tell a man that his job is to protect and lead his family. He figures that one out. You don't have to tell your kids that dad's job is to protect and lead the family. They already know it. The question is, dads, what do we do with this responsibility that is laid upon our laps? Do something on purpose with that responsibility that has been laid upon your laps. There is a reason. It's not actually a clinical term, but there is a reason why dads seem to carry all the baggage, that kids carry baggage about their dads. It's not a clinical term, but it's a term that's carried around in enough circles that it practically should be. People refer to the father wound. Have you heard of that? Yeah, the father wound. It really is the expectations that kids have of who their dad is supposed to be, only to find out that dad really isn't that guy. Right? He's hurt them in some way by letting them down on their expectations. People can experience a father wound by having a dad that they just don't know. Right? And if dad is never around, kids have to ask really hard questions like, why am I not important enough for you to be here to protect and lead me? And they go through a lot of their lives trying to figure out why they're not good enough. If you have a dad who is around, but he's emotionally distant, and this describes a lot of us as we're consumed with our workload, but we get home and all we want to do if you have a dad who is present, but he's emotionally distant, kids walk away with a father wound too, wondering why they can't find approval or engagement or attention from their dad. So they look for it from somewhere else. When dad is home, but his type of engagement is yelling, accusing, finger pointing, we've just seen a paradigm shift. The man who was given to protect the family is now attacking the family. That's one of the most frightening things a kid can experience. Okay? And for some reason, nobody talks about the mother wound. Ever. If I were to take a general poll of the 300 people here this morning, and I were to ask you, tell me about your dad. You'd all start out the sentence the same way. Well, my dad, he... I like my dad well enough, but there was this... People don't talk that way with their moms. They talk that way about their dads. Dad, I wish that maybe he had done more of this. I wish that maybe he had done more. He was a good dad, but he could have done this better. And what I've noticed... might surprise you, is that most of us don't walk around with mom issues. We walk around with dad issues. And I'm not talking about 15-year-old kids or 10-year-old kids. I am telling you there are 50-year-old men here this morning that carry baggage about who their dad was not. And okay, so you don't experience it the same way Absalom does, where Absalom goes, come on, Dad, protect my sister. If you're not going to do it, then I'm going to be the man in this situation. You don't experience it like that. You don't have to live a horrific life to feel like maybe your dad should have done more to protect and lead your family. But, dimes to dollars, most of the people here look back on their dad and go, I wish he had done more of this. Do you know what I'm talking about? No, I'm serious. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, some of you are actually doing it right now. You're searching back and you're thinking and you're starting to find some place inside of your heart that you go, oh, good grief, I guess I have. That's because a lot of us have it. Now, I want you to know that it's there between you and your Father because this means something. Because this message is going to mean something to you and me as fathers if we recognize that our words and our action and our engagement in the lives of our family leave an impression. My father has left an impression upon me. Some wonderful ones. A few I'd like to leave behind. His father before him. Surely my kids will rise up and say, Dad, Yeah, but it matters. Don't think the words that we use, the time invested in our kids, doesn't leave an impression. It leaves a deep one. You know, there's an interesting expression in the Bible. We find it all over in the prophets. We find it in Revelation. There's this phrase called the day of the Lord. And for the most part, theologically speaking, the day of the Lord, people have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what day that is, right? Is it this day? I can pretty much guarantee if it's really pinned on a piece of paper and everybody's counting to it, that's probably not the day of the Lord. But the idea of the day of the Lord, just the idea of the day of the Lord, as it's presented in the Old Testament and again in the New Testament, is there will be a day when our broken world is turned right. There will be a day when your wounds get healed. There will be a day when sin is abolished. There will be a day when righteousness is extolled. There will be a day when everybody confesses who the Lord is. There will be a day when all of the brokenness in our world that we experience, the pain that you live every day, there will be a day when that is turned around. That's called the day of the Lord. It might shock you to know that in Malachi chapter 6, when he talks about the great and awesome day of the Lord, it says, "And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of their children to their fathers." Even in the Bible, recognizing that the relationship between a father and his children is not meant to be as broken as it sometimes is. And so on that day, when every wrong is right and things are set as they should be, fathers and their children, their relationships will be set right. Three things. This first one might surprise you. If you've been with me up to this point, I want to encourage you today to give your father a Father's Day gift that maybe you've been holding on to for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. I want you to find a way to forgive him for being an imperfect father. Maybe you're not old enough to experience it yet, but you will. And you look back on your fatherhood with regret sometimes for the moments you were not there or the things that you did you wish you had not. But the reality is there is no father who is perfect, and nobody perfectly protects their family. Nobody perfectly leads their family. And if you carry wounds about your father, I encourage you to give him a gift this morning by figuring out how to come to peace with him. And it may not involve talking to him at all. It may involve just letting down your burden. The second thing I want you to walk away with, this is important, and I hope you've caught it by now. Every word carries weight. Every single one. They leave an impression on our kids. I think dads are responsible more than moms sometimes about how their kids go about finding approval and attention and eating disorders and clothing and all the other behaviors. Your words leave an impression with your kids. So dads, especially if you're young, take it to heart. And then last, I wish that the Bible wasn't filled with references to God as a father. because I have yet to see a perfect father. And so every time we say God is a father, sometimes our kids will only see and understand God through the lens of me or you as a father. And while that's very convicting to me, I want you to know He's not a father like me. He is a good father. He loves you. He cares about you. He protects you. He leads you. He is delighted in you. And He desperately wants a relationship with you. Which means if you come from a home where Dad doesn't take this job seriously, I want you to know that God does. And if you've never started a relationship with Him, you need to. And maybe you should start this morning. Fathers carry a heavy weight, and I'm going to be the first to confess that we don't always carry it well. It is my prayer that as my kids age, they stop seeing God through me, and they see God as He is.